Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing, the podcast for manufacturing leaders and professionals.
Designed for high impact on your way to work or unwind on your way home to gain clarity for tomorrow.
Step out of your comfort zone and discover new perspectives to add value, get results, and make a difference.
Yes, let's jump in.
Today, we've got a returning guest, Nikki Langman. And if you missed episode 44, she talked about some great experiences that she's had, but we never got to unpack who Nikki is. She's got a great story, and we really thought it was great timing to bring Nikki back on to hear about this, because we're hearing a lot of different things in the manufacturing industry, especially the last few months. Dave, what are you picking up on our industry?
Yeah, there's a lot of stress, no doubt, and from turnover to just what do we do to motivate those who do decide to stick around, stick with us. And, a lot kind of goes back to what are the core values in the business, in the industry we're in, that we're going to stick to no matter what. And I think that's maybe a great intro for Nikki. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Nikki, but I can tell you for myself, when push comes to shove, at the end of the day, there's decisions that we make that we look back on and say, I was true to who I am, or I compromised and kind of went against what my core values are. And that's where I am today. So now, it's time to make the correction and move on. So with mindfulness manufacturing, being self-aware, being aware of other people, it all comes back to, it starts with, and as we had discussed in our earlier episode, self-awareness is huge. So Nikki, what does that mean to you as far as maybe where we've been, where you've been, and some of the lessons that maybe we can share with our listeners?
Wow, Dave. Yeah, thank you so much for those questions. I hope your listeners have their seatbelts on, because we're about to talk about self-awareness and core values, which to me are two of the most pressing topics that any industry needs to be talking about. But I think especially manufacturing, you've got a real good opportunity there, because it is not something that is typically or traditionally on the forefront of people's minds. In fact, I think over the last X number of years, X number of decades, there has been a cultural expectation that you do not bring any kind of yourself into the workplace, that you leave your personal ideas, ideals, and baggage at the door and come into the environment ready to take on, put on the armor that is required for your job. What we're seeing now is a complete and radical shift to that, where people are saying, no, what I believe, what I feel, what I value, and how I do it need to be at the forefront of who I am and what I bring to this business. Let me share with you a little bit, if I may, if I can go back in my timeline and how I got to be so strong on my convictions about bringing who I am and showing up as my most authentic, self-aware self everywhere I go, especially at work. So if you have read my book, which if you haven't, I highly recommend it. I know the author. I think she did a good job.
Imagine that.
Love it.
No plug. But I had a very timely and accidental release of that book, where I wrote it at the beginning of COVID. So if we're looking at COVID as like an 18-month timeline, that's where we're sitting right now, but 18 months later, I had an opportunity to take some time away from work and write that book at the beginning, not knowing that we would still, a year and a half later, be in the trenches and in fact really starting to look more and more at our values and our ability to be resilient and what that means for us. So I say it was kind of an unfortunate but very timely release of that book, because I talk about my history of being a recovering alcoholic. And this is something that I never brought into the workplace until a few years ago.
And now with 1 in 4 people thinking about leaving their job, and with this chip business of the shortage of chips, plants are up and down. And then I got thinking more about you, Nikki, because it's like, that is sometimes when we rely on other substances, be it alcohol or whatever, to lean on when you do get stressed or whatever that is for you. And yeah, your willingness to share that story, I just think it puts things into perspective. So yeah, please.
Trevor, let's put a pin there. Remind me as we get a little farther on, because I do want to talk about the difference between short-term and long-term resilience and strategies that can be applied for that. So please remind me. I have only been very recently forthcoming and honest because, think about the disease of addiction. It is one of the most stigmatized mental health conditions in the entire world. And in fact, statistics show that, at the moment, there's about 300 million people that admit to having an alcohol use disorder. 300 million people worldwide.
Jeez.
Now, the population of the United States is 333 million. So if that puts it into perspective, there across the world right now, there are a lot of people who are putting their hand up saying, I'm not using alcohol appropriately. And that's just the people who are admitting it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know it.
Yeah, or just aren't being honest with themselves. And I think, and that's where the heart of self-awareness and core values really lies, is in our ability to be honest with ourselves. So for many, many years of my life, I fought, I did the brave fight between recovery and relapse, and recovery and relapse and whatnot. Grew up in the United States. Now I live in Australia, and having experienced recovery in both countries, I have to say America does it a lot better. And now I'm in a position in Australia to be one of those people who's speaking up, saying, wait a minute, we need more attention on this, because there's a lot of people, especially right now, who are suffering. And the way that we know they're suffering is because of, Trevor, like you just said, 1 in 4 people are leaving their jobs. What's the torment level like every day that most of us are going through when we're struggling with external pressures and our internal ways of coping with it? And if there's any gap in our ability to be honest with ourselves, or any gap in the strength of our core values and our adherence to them, then we're in big trouble. Those gaps are where people get into a lot of trouble. So anyway, read the book, but I chronicle my, experiences with addiction and struggle with getting sober. So I didn't get sober on my first try or my 50th, but 30 years after I started my career with drinking and substances, I finally was able to break free and get lasting sobriety. So that's my backstory. And in that time, I became very strong in who I was, because that whole process, it's a process of introspection and reflection. And to be successful, you must be terrifically honest with yourself.
Nikki, I don't know if that's a segue into long-term, short-term resilience or not, but I can imagine in what you just described, there was short-term resilience and then the long-term resilience. What would be the difference there?
Good question. Great segue. So think about yourself right now. And again, using COVID, because that's our current global circumstance that we're all grappling with. There are things that we can do in the short term to relieve the pressures that we're feeling. So those things might be, get more sleep, eat healthier, exercise more. Those all sound very boring. Maybe have a couple of drinks to unwind or something. But these are short-term things that we know work. Watch a funny movie, catch up with a good friend, spend way too much time watching TikTok reels. All those things can alleviate immediate pressures. And they're okay until the pressure starts to become a long-term thing, and the behavior starts to become repetitive. So again, using COVID as an example, where we're at right now, our financial situation might be starting to feel untenable. Our relationships with our work employees, or even our desire to want to be a part of that company, we might really be thinking about, wait a minute, this is, at some point, there's a tipping point. And that tipping point is different for every single person. So to me, the way to understand yourself and where your tipping point is, where are you going to get to the point where you say, I can't do this anymore, whatever it is to start to recognize your yellow lights. And this is, I would like to ask all of your listeners at some point today, if you're driving, don't do it right now, but as soon as you can, get to a mirror and look at the person in the mirror and just have an honest chat. Just say, all right, gloves off, I'll use one of Trevor's expressions, just get naked. Just get naked with yourself and just be honest with yourself. You don't have to share your self-assessment results with anybody else. But if you're lying to yourself, then nobody else is going to be able to help you ever.
So what would be maybe the top 3 questions to ask yourself looking in the mirror for this honest chat? How would you start that conversation?
Are you okay? That's what I'd ask myself. I would look in the mirror and say, are you okay? Because the first thing that we want to say is a knee-jerk reaction is, yeah, I'm fine. And that's fine. Say that to other people, but don't say it to yourself. If you are not okay, look at yourself in the eye and say, I can't do this anymore.
Awesome. What would be a couple more? What does okay look like for you?
Yeah. And maybe even identify shades of okay. Like shades of gray, that, what are my shades of okay? How okay am I? Because we can't be brilliant and gorgeous and talented and smart every day. But if we can be a shade of okay that is passable, then perhaps that's enough resilience to get through that point. So yeah, I absolutely. What does okay look like? What does fine look like? Why are we tempted to use those bland words when, as emotional intelligence experts, we know that having a strong emotional vocabulary is one of the keys to greater self-awareness and emotional intelligence. So for instance, anger, that's something that most people can understand. Even children 3-4 years old understand anger. But what's the difference between confusion and frustration? That's much more sophisticated. They're all shades of the same feeling, but there's a level of sophistication. So yeah, perhaps take that into your reflection. The other thing I suggest to do for long-term resilience, in addition to having that brutal honesty with yourself, is identify who your safe people are. So earmark some people in your life, at least one, who you trust to give you honest feedback and who you have an agreement with, a handshake agreement, that they will not take your responses personally. So you give them permission to call you out, and they know that, okay, I've got that permission, and no matter how he or she responds, I'm not going to take it personally. I'll use an example of this. My sister and I are very close. And even though geographically we don't live in the same country anymore, we spend a lot of time together traveling the world. So many, many, many times in cruise ships, hotel rooms and whatnot. And when my blood sugar gets low, I get very cranky, very hypoglycemic. I shake and I become very irritable.
Angry.
Hangry, yeah. And she knows this, and she knows that she needs to call me out because she will see my behavior before I see it. And so she will suggest that I have a sugary drink or a protein bar or something. And the response that she gets from me is not, oh, hey, thanks. Thank you. I really appreciate it. No, it's more like spitting venom at her from across the room. And that's okay, because she knows that that's not me talking. That is the hypoglycemia that's, affecting me. If you can have relationships like that, at least with one person, and it'd be great if it's in a workplace, like a, work buddy, where you can call them out, or they can call you out, and you have an agreement not to take offense to how it's received in that moment. That's a spectacular thing.
Wonder how many people have safe people.
Probably not enough.
That is part of the whole podcast concept, and why we're talking about this is because I heard that saying later, if you can name it, you can tame it. So I really like looking at it and looking yourself in the mirror. If you can recognize that, hey, Trevor's not Trevor right now, and I'm just keeping myself so busy and stressed out. And just reading that How Emotions Are Made from Lisa Fieldman Barrett has just been another eye opener of like, oh yeah, because as we get stressed, there's more cortisol, we're more inflamed, we're less resilient, and we can't make better choices in how we respond. And the mind and body and brain are all connected, and we build up all these experiences. So unless we change our context, which means looking in the mirror, having that conversation, and finding that safe person. So yeah, that all kind of comes together pretty nicely here. So hopefully I haven't lost too many listeners, but I guess if somebody's seen the title, that they're open to listen to it and thinking, hey, if you want a different result, you got to try a different approach. And maybe this isn't the mainstream and how we deal with things in manufacturing. It just needs to be. It's time. And with the turmoil between talking to one manager in a plant where 15% of the staff are out on COVID positive, to another one that has ran 16 weeks this year of production because of the chips, that, and then you end up losing good employees, and then they're stressed out. When all this is kind of building up, Nikki, and this is maybe a little off topic, how do you recognize in yourself or maybe someone around you that addiction is on its way, or that should be talked about more?
One of my favorite quotes is from Lao Tzu, and he says, if you do not change direction, you will end up where you're heading. And yeah, that's still, every time I think about it, I do that. Because I think in some ways, every single one of us could go to the mirror and look at ourselves and identify at least one continuum that we are on that's going to lead to an unhealthy outcome, whether that's our behavior towards food, our behavior towards alcohol, substances, or just lifestyle. Maybe we've been languishing too long or something. But there's, I think, one thing that all of us can be honest with ourselves and say, if I don't stop what I'm doing, if I don't change direction, I'm going to end up where I'm heading. And I think that's a really good self-reflection question to ask yourself. When it comes to unhealthy ways of coping, it's very individual. And again, like I said, about stigma, and especially with alcohol or illicit or substances, prescription or illicit, there's so much shame that's involved there. And I think also, food behaviors to a large extent too, because the results can be seen by other people. It's not something that you can completely carry internally and never be caught out. If people start to see the results of your behaviors, then that is either going to drive you deeper into that behavior, or it's going to be a wake-up call for you. Most of the time, it drives people deeper until they're ready to have that honest chat with themselves and say, "Am I okay?" Last year in the United States, there were 93,331 deaths for overdose on a substance. 93,331 in 2020. That was up 29% from the year before, and it was a record number. So when we look at what's in our news, what is penetrating our news right now, it is things like COVID, it is things, unrest in the Middle East. These things are all very important things that we need to be concerned about. But why aren't we talking at all about the silent killers that are affecting the people that we are, the people that we love, and the people we work with? Because 93,000 people died without any media attention. That's not okay.
It's almost like that's the backstory to everything else, because you can feel like just conversations in the neighborhood or with different colleagues. It's kind of like vaccination, no vaccination, mask, no mask. Oh, this state's out of control. This country's out of control. They should be doing that. You should be doing this. It's like, oh my gosh. Like I gotta say time out. And I go back to my core values, which is authenticity and presence. And those are my two. And I kind of ran those through Brene Brown's program. And it's just kind of like, okay, is this what I've tried to do is if I'm hearing it, I'm in a discussion, it's just having that vulnerability to say, you know what, I'm not okay with this conversation where it's going. Or it's like, sometimes it's kind of like, you know what, I'm not, this isn't good for me, this conversation. And it's just not who I am. And that ties back into my presence, because it's kind of like, I always want to be here with you right now on this podcast. And how else can others use that core values? And like when they're looking in that mirror, and what does that check look like? Because it's kind of like, okay, so is this the person I'm looking at in the mirror? Okay. And what does okay look like? And who is this person?
Yeah. If you can, involve those safe people in your, self-awareness conversations. And again, I say, be honest with yourself first. There's no excuse for that. And you don't have to tell anyone else what you think about you, but start there. If you can then extend it out and bring in some safe people. And my God, if you work in an environment, or if you are a leader in a work environment that can do this with a team, this is special. This is really special. Can you sit down with people that you trust and say, this is how I'm feeling? This is, go back to that wet bathing suit analogy. So as we were talked about in the previous episode, when you feel like you're wearing somebody else's wet bathing suit, when a decision does not sit right with you, or there's something happening that just gives you that all over icky feeling where, I don't really support this, but I don't want to be the only one in the room not raising my hand and nodding, call those things out. Say, hey, I'm having a wet bathing suit feeling about something. And I need to talk it out to find out where it's stemming from. Perhaps it is completely wrong. And other people will go, oh yeah, God, thank you so much. I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel the same way. Or you could still be the only person that's not okay with it. And that's okay too, because your core values, what drives you, Trevor, is going to be similar, but probably different than what drives me. So how we perceive the same situation is going to be different. If we can accept that, if we can allow that in our work environments, if we can be that leader in the room saying, let's just get this all out, get the elephant out in the room, everybody talk about how they feel about these things, and then we can move on. That's special.
An interesting twist to this conversation would be looking in the mirror and asking questions like, how patient am I? Am I as kind as I've ever been? Am I boastful? How rude have I been this week, this month, the past year? Do I insist on my own way? Am I irritable? How irritable am I? On a continuum. And I think that's an interesting twist to what we're talking about, where we can ask others those questions about us, in addition to just, again, looking in the mirror as you had described. If you can honestly answer questions along those lines, man, you're way to self-awareness. You're well on your way to identifying a potential directional change that, if you continue down the path of irritability, maybe a wild herring there, but I can't help but think of those things.
Oh, Dave, that's so good. It's so good. It makes so much sense. And yeah, I as you were talking, I was thinking about the word tendency. And I think that's a great opener for that type of conversation. When such and such happens, I have a tendency to, or I tend to, because, it's all of our behaviors can be either very productive or very unproductive. The behavior itself isn't the problem. Like, I say that one of my greatest assets is my perseverance. I put a very high value on perseverance, and I'm very good at it. However, that tendency toward perseverance has also dragged me into some very, very bad places where I have overused my ability to persevere long before or long after other people have stopped. But it's also led me to a force of good where I have persevered long after a point where other people stop. So if you can have a conversation like that in your workspace with your team, I have a tendency to, and humanize it, normalize those feelings. This is a very stressful time of our lives right now. Acknowledge it, bring it out into the open and say, you know what, I feel like I have been so irritable or short or distant for the last couple of months, and I don't like the way that feels. Can you help me to understand the impact that's had on you and how we can move forward and assist each other to be more present, moving forward.
Great summary, Nikki. And I think if the listeners can just leave this with knowing that they can look in the mirror and just kind of do that self-check-in. Number one, we got to check on ourselves first, and with that ultimate goal, like if you can be in a room with some of your coworkers and create that conversation and just, how is everybody feeling? I'm feeling a little like this, and then all of a sudden I was at the gym this morning and one of the guys is kind of like, oh, my shoulders, I don't know if I did something wrong. And then one of the women are kind of like, oh yeah, I'm sore there too. And it was just one of those things. It's that community feeling. And all of a sudden it was okay to be sore from yesterday because we're all sore. And all of a sudden we weren't as sore. It's crazy, but it's whether it's a sore muscle or whether it's like, I'm just frustrated of this up and down. And I don't even know next week if we're going to be running or not. I don't know if we're going to have enough chips or not. And now all this is out there looming. So yeah, I think just I love the conversation of just, look in the mirror and let's when you hang up today, when you're done the podcast, what's one thing you can talk about with someone today? And that might be yourself. All right. Thanks so much again, Nikki. As always.
Thanks, Trevor. Thanks, Dave. Great to be with you today.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thanks for taking the time to join us today. How you show up matters.
We'd love for you to subscribe, share with a colleague, and tell us what you think.
Your feedback's important to provide this high-quality, powerful program that makes a difference in your life and others. Take care.
See you next time.